All right, guys. Now, before we dive deep into the course and building full stack application, I like us to cover some Node.js basics. So these are the things I would like us to cover: Node.js basics, modules, which are very important, and then we're going to see how we can create a Node.js server and see how we can do the same thing with Express framework, which is built on top of Node.js. Remember. So I just believe that it will just help us to, have a good feel before we start actually building out applications. So for me, I'm just going to minimize this guy, and I have this folder here, MERN course. I'm going to create let me just open that up, and I'm going to create let me just bring this in. I'll create another folder inside this guy, and I'll call that Node.js, Node Basics, like so, and then I'll just hit enter. Now inside of this Node Basics, I would right click, and then I'll just click on git bash here. Essentially, I just want to open this folder inside of Visual Studio Code, its own code editor. So to do that, I'll just type out code and a dot. If I hit enter, it will open this folder, Node Basics, inside of Visual Studio Code. So let me just give it a few seconds. All right, so I have Visual Studio Code open right here on my computer. Now, for all of this to work, you actually need to make sure that you've properly installed Node.js. And to be sure that you've installed Node.js, just open any of your terminal, right, and just type node-v. It will give you, and hit enter, of course, it will give you the node version. So for mine, it's version 16 point whatever, but it's going to give you a number. If you don't get a number when you do this, then maybe you should try and reinstall Node.js properly. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to bring that down, and inside of this my Node Basics, I'll just create a new file. I'll call that file test, or maybe app.js. Now inside of this app.js, we're just going to demonstrate a couple of Node basics. So the first thing is that within Node.js, you can run a regular JavaScript function. So I will just create a function here. So let me just do arrow function, and I'll just call that function greet. And I did that with a shortcut that I created to make my life a little bit easier when I do stuff. Maybe I'll leave a link in the description to how you can create custom snippets too to make your life easier. All right, so for this simple function here, I'm going to give it a parameter of name, and then inside of the function, I will just do a console.log, which is just going to print out the name. So here I'll just say name. All right, great. So I'll come down here and call this function that I'm calling greet, so greet, and I'll give it an argument of my name. So my name in this case is Zeno. All right, so this is a simple JavaScript function, and we've called the function. Now, like I said, Node.js allows us to run regular JavaScript functions. So what I got to do is I'll just open my terminal. So I'll do control and backticks, or you can just use this option here. You're going to see terminal. Okay, I think I'll just use the option because my terminal is not opening. So terminal, and then new terminal. To open up your terminal here, and in this terminal, what you just need to do is you just need to type out node. So you got to come here and say node, and then the name of the file. So in my case, the name of my file is app.js. So I can just say app, and then I'll just hit enter. If you do that, you'll notice that we have the name here in our console. So let me just do maybe another one. So I'll just say John, for example, or John Doe. Save that, and then I'll come here again and run node and app. Now notice that I don't need to say app.js. It already knows that it's trying to run a JavaScript file. All right, so I'll say node app, and I'll hit enter, and now you see Zeno and John Doe. All right, so that's the power of Node.js. It gives us the ability to create a kind of server and run JavaScript on the server. All right, so let's see some other things we can do. In Node.js, there is a global object. So if I come down here, and of course I'll be logging this out, just to commenting this out, just to keep our work neat. So if I come down here and do a console.log of global, Node.js has a global object. So if I come here and run this guy one more time, node app, you see in the console here that we have this big object here, so global, and then it has some method. So you see clear interval, clear timeout, set interval, and stuff like that, right? So let's just do maybe an example here. So I'll just come down here and then I'll just say, okay, let me comment this out so that we don't have such a huge data in our log. So I'll just say global, and then I'll call the dot set interval, and you know this is going to take a callback function. So let's open that with an arrow function, and the set interval method usually has a time argument. So here I'll just say I want it to run every 3 seconds, which is 3000 milliseconds. And inside here, let's just do a simple console.log that will say MERN Stack Course. So I'll open the quotes, and then I'll say MERN Stack. Okay, what am I typing right now? MERN Stack Course, like so, and then I'll save. Now watch what happens in our console here. Let me come down here, and I'll come here and maybe I'll clear this guy out first. So clear, hit enter, and then I'll just run node and app. See what happens? So you see we got MERN Stack Course. Oh, there was a typo there, but just watch. Every 3 seconds is going to run that MERN Stack Course. Let's make it a little bit faster. So I'll just come here and say every 1 second run the MERN Stack. So I'll save that, and of course I'll need to cancel out of this process by pressing Ctrl C, and then I'll run that again. So now every 1 second it will just add MERN Stack Course to the console, as you can see. So that's the power of Node.js. Let's see some other examples here. There are some other properties that we have access to right from this our file here. So I'm going to comment this out, right? And I'll come here and do another console.log, and this time I'll say underscore underscore, and I want to get the directory name. So currently I'm in this folder node basics. If I want to get that directory name, how am I going to do that? So I'll say underscore underscore, that's 2 underscore dir and name, right? Then there's something else we can do. I'll duplicate this downwards, and then I'll say file name. See, so that's double underscore and file name. I'll go ahead and save, and let's try it out. So let me clear first, and then I'll run it. Aha, so you see the first console.log here gives us access up to the folder that we are in, node basics, while the second console.log further shows us the file that we are in, which is app.js. All right, so those are some of the things that you just need to know how Node.js works, or know how you can run JavaScript in your Node.js environment. So in the next video, I'm going to teach you, or we're going to talk about modules in Node.js. All right, welcome back, guys. Now let's quickly talk about modules in Node.js. So what is a module? Well, modules are blocks of encapsulated code that can communicate, or that we use in our applications. And most times modules are separated into different files. So technically we can say that a module is a single file that contains a block of code, but it can also be a collection of multiple files. So let's just get into the practical aspect, right? So if I come to this my file structure here and I create another file, I'll call it person.js, like so. And inside of this file, I'll create 2 variables. So I'll say const. The first one is going to be person, and that's going to be equal to just my name. So here I'll just say Zeno, and then I'll create another one. This one I'll call it people, so plural, and I'm going to make it an array. So just make it an array, and my name is going to be first. Then I'm just going to have John, and lastly I'm going to have another name, which so that I don't need to put a comma there, and I'll just say Kome. That's the last name, like so. So I have an array of 3 names. Yeah, great. Now I'll take this a step further by doing a console.log. Let me close this file structure up. I'll do a console.log of the person and the people, like so. Of course, I'll save that now and everything should just be fine. Now, what if I wanted to use this file, person.js, inside of my app.js? Well, I would need to actually find a way to export this file or whatever is written in this file, the block of code, into app.js. And that's where modules come in. So that point where I'm separating my code into a different file, this person.js now can be referred to as a module in Node.js. Now there are two common ways for us to separate and import our code from one file to another. The first one is the ES module, and ES in this case stands for ECMAScript. So let me just comment this out, and then I'm also going to comment this out. Then I'll bring this down. Let me add another comment here and just separate it. All right, so the default in Node.js for importing different modules to a particular file is the common JS module. I said there are two main ways. So the first one is the common JS, and the next one is the ES modules. So ES modules, while the first is the common JS. So in Node.js, what is the default is the common JS module. You can actually set it to have ES module, but first let's talk about common JS module. Or since I expect that you're coming from a React background, let me actually just show you what the ES module looks like. So if I just bring in a React app here, yeah, so this is a React app and I'm in my app.js. You notice something here. I created a variable, I called that variable URL, and I just did export. So I exported it. Now what this means is that this variable can be accessed or can be imported from other files, just like what we did here. So here I imported task list from the place where task list is located, the task list components. So essentially what we have here is the ES modules setup. That's what we have in this React application. But like I said, in Node.js, the default is the common JS module. So let me show you what the common JS module looks like. So for me to use this person.js in the app, I need to say const, and I'll just give it a name. It can actually be anything you want. It can be ABC, or it can be data, whatever it is you want. So I'll just make it ABC, for example. So ABC, and then I'm going to set it to be equal to, I'll use the keyword require. Now inside of this require, I'll open quotes and then I'll specify the location of this person.js file. So where is it located? Well, it's located in the same folder. So ./person. Okay, and you don't need to add the .js, so just say ./ and then the name of the JavaScript file. That's it. So now what do you think is going to happen if I save this file? Well, before I save it, let me open up my terminal, right? So I have my terminal open, and then I'll go ahead and save this file. Now in my terminal, I'm going to now run this file. So I'll just come here and say node, and I want to run the app. So I'll hit enter. Watch what happens. Voila. So you see here in the terminal, we have the console.log first of the names, and then we also have the array. So if you come to this person.js, you realize that that's exactly what we did. We logged the person and the people, and that's what we have here, even though it's in a different file. So that's how we break down our application into smaller bits. And in programming, that is called separation of concerns. You're going to learn all about that in the next project. Now, but what if I wanted to export just the person, right? How am I going to do that? I don't want to log them directly from here. So let me actually just delete this guy. And the way I'm going to export just the person is I'll just say I'll say person. So let me undo that. Yeah. So I'll come down here and I'll say module dot exports. So remember, this export is actually plural. There's an S at the back, but the module is just module, not modules. And then I'm going to set that to be equal to person. That's all I need to be able to use this person in another file. So if I save that here and then I come here, so now this ABC is pointing to this person that I exported here. Okay, now I can now come down here and do a console.log of ABC. Remember, this variable name can be anything you want. It can be person, it can be anything at all. So I'll go ahead and save that, and then if I come down here and run my app one more time like so, you'll see here that I just have the Zeno. Now there's another thing that comes to mind. What if I wanted to also export people? How do I do that? Well, all I need to do is I need to come down. I'll just duplicate this and comment the first one out. So I'll say module.export, and instead of just pointing to person, I'm going to delete this and open an object. Remember, an object has a property and a value. So for the first one, I can just say person like so, and that's the property name, and I'll set the value to the person variable. All right, I'll add a comma here, and I'll do the same for the people. So here I'm just going to edit both of them together and say people. All right, so but in JavaScript, when you have the property name and the property value as the same word, in year 6 we can actually just remove the value altogether. Okay, so let me just do that. Escape. Aha. So I can just say person and people, and JavaScript knows that I'm referring to person as both the name and the value, and then I'll go ahead and save. So I've successfully exported these two guys here. So how am I going to access it here? Well, I can say abc dot person. Okay, so and then abc dot people. Okay, because it's an object. If I go ahead and save that and then I run this guy here, hit enter, then you see that we now have the person and the people. But a better way to do this is to actually destructure it right from this place where we are requiring the module. So I can just come here, instead of saying ABC, I can destructure it and bring out the two properties, which is the person and the people. All right, so now I don't need to then say ABC whatever. I just delete that and I have person and people. Save that, and I'll come here, run. Let me clear this because I think it's getting cluttered. All right, and then I'll run node app, hit enter, and then you see we have the person and the people. So that's how creating modules and exporting and using them in Node.js actually works. And remember, in Node.js the default is the common JS, and just stick to the default. There's a way you can change it to ECMAScript, but I just recommend you just stick to the default, which is what I just showed you here. All right, so thank you so much for watching this one. I'll see you in the next one. All right, welcome back, guys. Now there are some modules that come packaged with Node.js. They come pre-created with Node.js. They are called core modules. I just want to give you just maybe one or two examples of those, so that when you see them in the future while we build projects, you will not be surprised if you don't have any experience with Node.js at all. So what I got to do is I'll just comment the console, or maybe just get rid of the console.log altogether, and then I'll just show you maybe one or two. So the first one I want to show you is the OS module. So the way I got to bring that in, and like I said, it comes with Node.js. So I'll say const and I'll just call it OS. Remember, you can give it whatever name you want, but it's going to be equal to, so we're going to require, open a parenthesis here, and then I'll just say OS inside of quotes. So let me quickly do a console.log of the OS so that I'll just see what it is actually. Just show us what it is. So I'll go ahead and save that, and then I'll just run my app here. So node app, hit enter, and as you can see we have a gigantic object here. So if you open that, you see the OS module. It has so many properties here, right? But what we are interested in is maybe something a little bit specific. So this OS property, for example, it has something like maybe the operating system dot platform. So let me just show you that, and then it's a method. So I'll just open parentheses there, and then I'll save. So you see I'm doing os.platform and I'm calling it like a function. Let's come here and run. Maybe I'll clear first. So let me do clear. Okay, then I'll run node app, hit that, and as you can see, it's showing me here that I'm using a Windows system here. So if you were on a Mac, it should probably show you Darwin or something. All right, let me show you another one. We'll come down here and I'll create const. I'll show you the path module, and that's going to be equal to, I'll say require and path. You guessed that correctly. So what does this path module, what does it entail? Let me comment this out just for our reference. All right, so here for me to use that, I'll just do a console.log of path so that we can see what it contains, right? We're going to use that much later, for example, when we are deploying our application. So I'll go ahead and save, and then I'll run my Node app. And as you can see, it's also an object that has some properties. All right, so if you look inside here, you see things like path.resolve, path.join, and much later when we, like I said, when we launch our application, we're going to see how we can use all of these modules. Now there are several other core modules that come with Node.js, but we cannot talk about everything now. If not, this course is going to be incredibly long, but I just wanted to show you that there are some core modules that come pre-packaged in Node.js, and this is just two examples of them. All right, thank you so much. In the next one, we're going to learn how to create a server. All right, so in this one, we're going to learn how we can create a server with Node.js, which is like the main thing that we actually need when we want to build the back end of an application. Yeah, so I'm going to create a new file. I'll call that file node server. So come here, I'll create a new file. I'll say node server.js. Hit enter, and let's close that up so we have some space. Now, to create a node server, there is a specific core module we need, and that is the HTTP module. And HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So let's bring it in. So I'll say const. I'll name that module HTTP, which is like a convention, and I'll set it to be equal to require, and I'm sure you're guessing right. It's also going to be HTTP because that's the module we need. Yeah, and then I'm going to come down. This HTTP, I can create a server with this module. So I can say something like HTTP dot, and then it has a method create server, right? Now that method, we're going to open parenthesis. The method is going to take a callback function, right? So let's open a callback function, and I'm just going to use an arrow function syntax like this to open that up, right? Now, but to be on the safe side, I can actually assign all of these to like a variable name. So I'll just come to the front here and say const, and I'll call it server and set that to be equal to now http.createServer. Now, remember we added a callback function here. This callback function is going to have two parameters. The first is the request and the second is the response. Now, don't get me wrong, it can actually have more than two, but for now, this is the two most important that we need. What does this word request mean? It simply means the request you're making to the server, and that request is going to have some properties. Then response means the response that you get when the server analyzes your request. So you can get an error, for example, or you can get a piece of data back from the server if you're authorized or if you're authenticated, or what, depending on how the server is set up. So now that I've created the server, I'm just going to do a console.log in the body here. So console.log, and I'll say maybe I'll just say hello world, or maybe something more. So node server. All right, great. Now that we've created the server, the next thing we need to do is we actually need to listen for maybe any request that is made to this server, if you get what I'm trying to say. So how I'm going to do that? So because we've attached all of these to this variable name here, I can simply just come down and then say server dot listen. All right, and open that up. Now this is going to take some parameters as well. So the first is the port. All right, so let me just write everything I need, then I'll now explain. So the port can be any number you want. I'm sure you've already seen something like localhost 3000 if you're coming from a React background. When you create React apps and you run the apps locally, it will open localhost 3000. That 3000 actually is the port or the port number. Don't worry, we'll come to what that means. The next thing that needs to go into this server.listen is the local host itself. So here I'm just going to come and say local host. All right. And I'm sure you may be thinking that why doesn't localhost come first, then 3000 comes next? Actually, we can even do without, specifying this localhost because it's a default. But I'm just showing you what actually comes. All right, great. Now, the last thing that's going to enter here is a callback function. So I'll use my arrow function syntax like this, and then I'll just open that up. All right. Now, inside of this callback function, I'm going to do a simple console.log of, just say something, maybe server is running on the port. So for this particular purpose, I'm going to change this port to, it can be any number you want as long as that number is not currently in use. All right. So usually I like to make my backend 5000, but let me just make sure that I don't have another. Okay, there's no other app running on 5000. Great. So I'm just going to do a console.log of server running on, and I'll say port 5000. Simple. All right. So now let's take a look at the structure we have here. Let's start with this local host. What is this local? What's this local host here? Local host here is actually a maxed version of an IP address, and that IP address is, let me come down here and just put it in the comment. That IP address is 127.0.0.1. Now, what is this IP address? This is actually an IP address of your local computer, your local machine. This is the IP address of this my computer I'm using right now, and it's the same for your local computer. Now remember, when you visit a website, that website is actually an IP address, a string of numbers. But because you cannot remember that IP address, it is now linked to a domain name, like maybe google.com. So that's exactly what is going on here. So this IP address is now linked or marked with local host. All right. Now remember, this IP address is pointing to your local machine. But for an application or a software to access this IP address, which helps you convert your machine to a server with the help of Node.js, it needs to have a door, an access point. It needs to have a specific channel, because for example, you can have different applications or different servers running on your machine at the same time. You can have a React app, you can have this particular project running on the backend Node.js, you can have several. So that is where we now bring in the idea of port, which is the access or the door or the channel with which a software can access your computer. So in our case here, we are using the port of 5000. Okay. All right. So that's exactly what it is. Now that we've, created the server and we are listening on for that server, we can then go ahead and save this guy and then run the server. How am I going to run the server? Well, I'll come here and say node and then the name of this file, which is node server. So I'll just come down here and say node hyphen server, and then I'll hit enter. Okay, so you see here I get my server running on port 5000. Great. All right, so we've been able to successfully create a server. Now let's actually just try this out. I'll come to my browser here and I'll just say localhost and I'll change this to 5000. Hit enter and let's see what happens. Voila. If you look in the console here, you see now we now have this console.log node server, all right, which is coming from this point here. So you see that is actually fired. Of course, in our browser, you'll notice that this keeps running. That's because we did not specify anything to happen aside this console.log. So it's just going to keep loading until you cancel it out. Okay. So now let's take this a step further. Let's actually make something meaningful to happen when we come to localhost 5000. And for that to happen, we need to create what is known as a route. So in the next video, we're going to create a route. All right, now, if this was your first time of actually creating a server with Node.js, then I say a big congratulations to you. Now let's go ahead and see how we can create a route. Okay, so first off, I'll just get rid of this console.log, which we don't need anymore right now. And for us to create a route, we actually need to start exploring what this request object here means. So if I come to my inside the body of my callback function, I'll do a console.log of the request. Okay, and then I'll just go ahead and save that. Now remember, whenever you make changes or whenever you make a change to your this file here, your server file, you need to come here and restart it. So I'll do Ctrl+C to close the process, and then I'll run the node server file one more time. So you see here I get the server running on port 5000, which means everything is working fine. Now let me refresh this page and let's see what happens. So I'll refresh the page, and oh, okay, I think I needed to actually type the localhost 5000. So let me do that and enter. Voila. So you see here we have this gigantic object here that is inside of our console in the code editor. So if you open it, it's a very big object. It contains a lot of things because the request is a very big object that contains different properties, right? So let me just show you one or two so that we don't get confused here. I'm just going to change this to request dots. Let's see, so I'll maybe say request dot URL. Then I'll do another one. I'll say request dot method. Let's just do this too. Okay, now I'll save that first. I'll save the file, then I'll just cancel out of this process, Ctrl+C. All right, so let me first clear the console so that we have a neat working space, and then I'll run this node server file one more time. So I'll say node server and hit enter, and let's see what happens. Voila. So what's going on here? So first off, we get our server running on port 5000, which is coming from this server.listen. Then we get this /, which is the URL. / simply means like maybe home page. All right, so localhost 3000 5000 /, that's what that means. Then you see the request of method, we get this text here, get. So in the next video, maybe the next two videos, we're going to talk about the different request methods, right? But just know that the one we're getting here is get. You probably have an idea of some of them from your React knowledge, like the get request, the post request, the put request, and all of that. All right, we'll talk about them in a separate lecture. All right, so now we've had just a taste of the request object and some of the properties that it has, properties and method that it has. Now what we need to do is we need to create a route. So let me get rid of this guy here, and I will create my first route. I'll use an if statement to specify the route. So here, let me open up an if statement, and I'll say that if the request.url is equal to, and then I'll just say /. Now, I don't know, I think I did not actually say what a route is. A route is just the URL here. So if you say localhost 5000 /, that's a route. Localhost 5000 / about, that's another route. All right, so that's just what a route is. So don't get it twisted. It's just a simple URL. Let me come here, add a comment and say routes. Okay, so now I'm saying that if the request.url is equals to a /, what do I want to do? Well, I want to send something to the browser. So here I'm just going to say response. So now we are talking about response. Now we want to send a response back to the user's browser. So I'll say response.write, which means that I want to write something on the page. And then I'm just going to say home page. And then let me just add a ... Okay, great. I'll go ahead and save that. Oh, before I save that, I need to come down here and end this process, because when you fire this process, your browser is still going to keep loading just like it's loading here. So you need to end the process to tell the browser that, okay, the response has ended from the side of the server. So I just say response dot end, and then you just open the parenthesis there. Great. So now let's save this file and test these routes we just created. So for that, remember, when you make any change in Node.js, you gotta close this guy and run it one more time. So I'll come and run it again, node server, and I get server running on port 5000. Now you see here we now have home page. Let me expand this up. So you see on the page here we have home page, and this guy has stopped loading. Now what if I wanted to not just display some text? What if I actually wanted to display HTML on the page? How am I going to do that? Well, first off, I'm going to specify that I want this page to display HTML, and I need to do what is known as set the headers. So I'll come up here just before the response.write. I'll say response dot set header. Okay, so you see now we are interacting more with the response object. So after you get your request, you analyze the request, you need to send the response. So I want to set the header, and you've probably seen something like this where you make a fetch request in the front end of your application, maybe using the fetch API. So to set my header, first off, I'm going to specify a property, and the name of that property is called content type. So content hyphen type. Now this is actually important. The C is capitalized, the T is also capitalized. Then I'm going to add a comma and set the content type to text / HTML. All right, so now that I've set it to text / HTML, I can come down here and maybe make this a H2. So I'll just say H2, and then I'll just go to the end and close it up. So like that, H2. Aha, now let's go ahead and save and see if it takes effect. I'll save that, and of course I need to run this one more time. So Ctrl C to close, Ctrl C to cancel out of the process, and then I'll run node server again. Let's refresh the page. Voila. So you see now we now have the home page in H2. So you see that's how we can send a HTML from our response. Now let's just create one more route before we proceed. So I'll just duplicate this, and it's just going to be very fast. This time I'm going to say that if the request.url is equals to / about. So now I'm creating an about page. I'm still going to set the header, but this time I'm going to change this to my about page. Okay, and we're going to end the response. I'll go ahead and save this guy. We're going to cancel the process in our server by doing Ctrl C, and then I'll run node server one more time. Now let's refresh this page. Of course, if you refresh it, it's still going to be on the home page. But what we need to do is we need to now go to a new route, which is / about, and then hit enter. Watch what happens. Voila, suddenly we are in the about page. All right, so that's essentially how you create routes in your node server. So we've seen how to create a server with Node.js, and we've seen how to create different routes or different pages, if you allow me to use that word. Great. So in the next one, we are going to see how we can do the same thing but with Express, and we're going to see how easier it is. All right, see you in the next one then. All right, welcome back. Now in this one, we're going to see how we can create a server, right, based on top of Node.js, but we're going to use Express framework. Now for you to actually know what Express framework is, we need to go to the package manager website, which is npmjs.com. Hit enter, and it will just open the npm website. Now basically I want to search for Express, and some of you probably have used Express a couple of times. So I'll just open Express. The first result I get here, voila. So this is all the information we need to have about Express, so you can just go ahead and go down and read how it works. Okay, but I'm going to show you, that's why I'm here. So but if you come to this side here, you will see that this is how you install it. You say npm install express, and look at the number of weekly downloads for this package, 24 million. That's massive. So a lot of people are building their backend with Express.js all over the world, right? So anytime you even want to use an npm package, one of the pointers you want to check before you use it is the number of weekly downloads, because if many people are using it, then it means it has an active team that is maintaining it. All right, so now let's go ahead and um, install Express. So I just got to copy this guy, but before we even install Express, there's something we need to do. We need to initialize our directory to prepare it so it can receive packages, so we can install packages in this directory. So if you come here, you see that we just have some files. Now to initialize our directory, there's something very important we need to do. First off, I'm going to cancel out of this process by pressing Ctrl C, and I'll clear the terminal. So first off, we need to initialize this directory. How we do that? I'll say npm init, and if I just hit enter now, it will ask me a number of questions, but because I don't want to have to answer those questions, I'll just say init and give it a -y flag. Now I know that let me expand this and see if it's going to be clearer. Oh, okay, I'll just do it again. So I'll do Ctrl C. Okay, great. So I'll say npm init and then -y. That's basically what I just did. And then I hit enter. So it will just create a package.json file for me. Package.json file is what will now help me track all the packages I install and manage all the packages I install in this directory. All right. All right, so it's done here. And if you open up your file system, you see now we now have this package.json. So if I open the package.json, look at everything here. It has installed everything, and we now have some information here which we're not using at the moment. And if you look at this, the main, which is the main entry point, it has set the main entry point to app.js, which is this file. But that's not what we want, right? But don't worry, we're going to do something else. So now that we've initialized this directory, we can now go ahead and install Express. Remember how we do that? We say npm I, which stands for install, and then the name of the package, which is Express. Hit enter, and then it's going to install Express, which may take a couple of seconds. So I'm just going to pause the video, and when it's done, we're going to continue. All right, so Express has finished installing. And if you come to this, your package.json, and check on dependencies, you see now we now have Express, and this is the version number. Great. I'm just going to close this guy and close all of these guys that we're not using except for the node server, because I just want us to be able to compare. Now I'll create a new file. I'll call that file express-server.js. Okay, so I'll say express-server.js, like so. Hit enter. It's inside this file. I'll now create my Express server. So just like in Node.js that we use this HTTP module, the difference is that in this one we're going to use Express. So I'll say const express, and I'll set that to be equal to, remember we're going to require, and parent quotes there, we're going to add Express. So we're requiring Express. Now one very common practice is to assign this Express to initialize it. So I'll come here and say Express and initialize it, but it's better to just assign it to a variable name, just like we did here when we said const server and we created a server. So I'll come here and say const app, and that's going to be equal to Express. Great. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to listen for the Express app we just created, or Express server we just created. And how do we do that? We're just going to do app. So I'll come here and say app.listen, open my parentheses here, and which port do I want to listen on? Well, let's just listen on port 5000. And remember, I did say in the previous one of the previous videos that you don't need to actually specify this localhost. It can work without localhost. What is very important for you to specify is the 5000. Localhost is the default, so it's going to work. All right, so I'll specify the 5000, I'll add a comma, and then I'll just immediately call my callback function like so. Now for my callback function, I always like to open the parenthesis, the curly braces. So this curly braces, I like to open it. I'm aware that if you're writing a one-liner, you can just go ahead and do console.log and just say maybe server running on port 5000. I know you can do that, right? But as just a matter of preference, I just like opening my arrow function because I feel like it makes it a little bit more readable. That's how I feel. Okay, two curly braces is not going to kill my application or make my application incredibly slow. All right, now I've created a server. I'm going to go ahead and save this guy, and then let's run this file. So I'll come down to my terminal. I'll first clear the terminal, and then I'll just run node. And what's the name of the file? Okay, so it's called express server, like so. I'll hit enter. Let's see what happens. Voila. So you see here, we now have server running on port 5000. Now I want to ask you a very honest question. Between this setup and this one, which one do you think is neater? Which one do you think is, sleeker, easier to write, easier to read, easier to remember? I'm sure you probably going with express server, which is what we just created here. All right, so now let's do the next thing in the next video, or I think we can actually do it here because it's very straightforward. We're just going to create a route. So I'll come down here and let me add a comment, which I'll say routes. And how do we create a route here? So I'm going to create a home route. I'll say app.get. Okay, so remember when we did a console.log of when we did a console.log of request.url and request.method, one of the results we get for the request.method was a get request. So that's exactly what we're doing here. So app.get, which simply means that we're performing a get request. We want to get a resource from the server. I'll open that up, open the parenthesis, and then I'll specify the route. So in this case, it's going to be the home page. So the home page is going to say /. Then I'll add a comma, and this is going to now take a callback function. So let's open the callback function like so. And just like in our Node.js server, we gave it a request and a response. This is also going to take a request and a response. Now remember, I said that that's not the only parameters this can take. It can take several other things, right? Error, next, and all of that. But for now, these are the two important things we need: request and response. So let's come here. So when you make a request to this route here, /, what do we want to happen? We want to send a response to the user. So in Express, there's a way we can do that. So we're going to say response.send. All right, and then I'll open the parenthesis and specify what I want to send. So for example, if I wanted to send, I'll make it different from the other one. Maybe I'll say welcome to the homepage, like so, just to make it different from the other one. Right, I'll go ahead and save that. And remember, when we make changes to our file, we need to Ctrl+C in our terminal to cancel, and then we need to run the file again. All right, so server running on port 5000. I'll close this guy and let's reload this port 5000 and see. So I'll reload the page, and voila. I was reloading the about page. Sorry, I need to reload it on the home page. So home page, aha. So you see, welcome to the home page. All right, so now are you looking at the routes? This route set up here and this one here. I'll close this guy and this one here. Which one do you prefer? I'm sure you already seen that, oh, this one is a lot neater. So essentially that's what framework aim to do. The aim of a framework is just to make our life a little bit easier when we work with a particular language. All right, so Now remember, in this one we were sending this h2. How can we do that here? Well, I'll just come here and specify. I'll just open this up and just say h2 like this, and then let's come to the end and close it. I'll close that and say h2 and then save. That's all. I'll come here to my terminal, cancel out of the process with Ctrl C, run my Node Express server, and then let's refresh this page. Voila. So you see, we now have welcome to the home page, which is h2 here. So you notice that working with Express, it's a lot easier than just working with the regular Node.js and all of that. So I just wanted you to have an appreciation for Express. That's why I did a comparison between both of them. So in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to find a solution to this problem that, every time we make a change to the file here, we need to come here, cancel out of the process, and then run it again. It doesn't make sense, right? It's going to waste a lot of time. So, but there's a solution for it, and we're going to see that in the next video. All right, so now let's find a solution to this problem of having to restart our server every time we make a change to our file. So we're going to come here, come to npmjs.org, and I'll search for node and then mon, which is just a short form of the word node monitor. So it's just going to continuously monitor our server, and then if there's any change, I'll open it. It will just restart the server automatically. So I'll open that. All right, so you see here, this is the node mon package, and if you check here, weekly download, you see it has 4.7 million weekly download at the time of recording this video, and it's a very lightweight package. Now the interesting thing about nodemon is that you don't actually need to install it like in such a way that it will be on your server when you upload your application to the cloud. So let me come here. This is how you install it: npm install nodemon. So I'll copy that and then I'll come back to my application here, cancel out of this process, and then I'll just paste that in. So npm install nodemon. Like I said, you don't want to install it. Let me open up my package.json, so I'll show you what I'm saying. So you don't want to install it as a dependency that will be on your server, because you don't need nodemon on your server. The server has its own way of monitoring changes that occur in your application. You don't need nodemon. It's only needed locally when we are developing our application. So for us to install it as a local dependency, I'll give a space and then I'll add -d, which stands for development, and then I'll hit enter. So I'll just give it a few seconds to install. Meanwhile, I'll just pause the video. Aha, so now nodemon has installed. Now look at what we did. We said -d. If you look in our package.json, you notice that it's in its own property here, dev dependencies. So it's not in our regular dependencies, which will be installed when we upload the application to Heroku, for example. This is only going to be installed locally. All right, so what this means is that the way we've installed it now, what this means is that for every node project we build, we are going to have to install nodemon as a dev dependency. There's another way though. We can install it globally. Some people don't like installing it globally because they claim that they have some issues with the setup and how it works, but I installed nodemon globally and I've not had any issue. Installing nodemon globally means that you don't need to install it in every project because it's already on your machine. All you just need to do is just call it or use it. So to install nodemon globally, all we need to do is run the node npm install nodemon, and instead of just saying -d, I'm going to say -g. Okay, that stands for global. So if you install it like that, hit enter, nodemon will be installed on your machine globally, so you don't need to install it for every project. Okay, so let me show you something. I'm going to uninstall it from this project, and you see that I'll still be able to use nodemon. But first, let me show you how it works. So I'll cancel out of this process, Ctrl C. Yes. Okay, let me clear this so that we have a neat terminal. Great. So I will open this up, and remember we were running Express server. So the way you can use NodeMon to continuously monitor this Express server.js is you're just going to say NodeMon, then the name of the file you want to monitor. So express-server, like so, and then hit enter. So right here, you see server running on port 5000. Of course, now if you come here to our project, everything is still working fine. If you refresh, you're gonna see this. But when we make changes to this file, for example, if we create a new route, so let me create an about route. So I'll duplicate this app.get and I'll just change this to /about. Then I'll change this to welcome to the about page, right? And then I'll just go ahead and save. Now we've made changes to this file. Watch, you notice that NodeMon restarted due to changes, and then we now have server running on port 5000. So when you have NodeMon, you don't need to keep coming back to close the process and restart your server. So if I come down here, just to make sure that everything is working well, I'll go to /about and hit enter. Watch. So you see, welcome to about page. So that's the power of NodeMon. But another thing is, let me cancel out of this process just to show you something. Another thing is, it doesn't make sense for us to be coming here on this point here to run NodeMon. So what we can do is, in our package.json, we can add a script. If you come up top here, you see here that we have node script. But before you even add a script, just make sure that your main file is pointing to the file that you want to run as your server. In our case, it's express server.js. So I'm going to change this to express-server.js. So that's my main file. Then I'm going to create a script. So just make it easy. I'll just create a new script. So I'll just delete this. Or you know what, I'll not delete it. I'll just create from this one. So test, I'll make this start. Then I'll just delete everything inside this guy. So start, and I'll just make this node, then the name of the file. So it's going to be express-server. Okay, you can add the .js if you wish. Okay, so now let's create another script. I'll duplicate that and I'll say npm. The name of this script is going to be Backend. So Backend. Then this is going to be NodeMon. Now, if you may be wondering, why am I having two scripts to run the server? This start script is actually reserved for when you deploy your application to Heroku or to a server online, an actual server. So if I deploy my application to Heroku, for example, the command to start that application is node and the name of the root file. So, but when I'm working locally, I would like to just run this backend. Some people may use dev or whatever. You can use anything you want, but I just prefer to use backend because that's the backend of my application. And for local development, I want to use NodeMon. So I'll go ahead and save this guy, and then let's come here. So instead of coming here to type NodeMon, all you just need to do is just say npm and then run backend and hit enter. So I know I'm running the backend. It will point to this command, and let's see if it actually works. Voila. So you see here, we now have server running on port 5000, which is coming from these scripts that we just run here. However, when you want to run the start command, like for example, if I wanted to run the start command locally, I don't need to say npm run start. I can just say npm start, because that's just the way it's set up, right? npm is set up. For start, you don't need to say run start, just say npm start and it's going to fire. But for any other thing aside start, you need to specify and say npm run and then whatever it is. Okay, so that's just what I wanted to point out. Thank you so much for watching this section. In the next one, we are then going to start using Express to build a MERN project. All right, thank you and see you in the next one. Alright guys, so now before we move on, let's talk about HTTP request method. And like I said before, it's an acronym that stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and it just specifies a collection of request method which we're going to see. And the purpose of all those request method is to specify what action, or to tell our server what action is to be performed on a particular resource. Now forget about all of these jargons I just said. We're going to get down into what this actually means. Now the most commonly used HTTP request method are these ones I've listed here. So there's the get request. Now we've seen the get request when we created the routes, right? We used the app.get. But there's also the post request, the put request, patch request, and delete request. Now, these ones are just listed. They are the most commonly used ones, but they are not all the request methods. So we have others that include the head, connect, options, and even trace requests. I have added this link so that you can do some further study. So you can actually open this tutorial points link and just see more about it. All right, so let's move on. Now let's talk a little bit about those requests individually. So there is the get request. What the get request is used to do is that it's used to read or retrieve data from a web server. So you probably have used this a lot when you build front-end applications that rely on other people's API. For example, the GitHub application. So from your React front end, you make a request to the GitHub API endpoint, and then you get some JSON data that you now display on your page. That's a get request. But there's also the post request, and this is used to send data, which could be a file or some form data. It's used to send that data to the server. Now, next there's the put and the patch request. Now I put both of them together because what they do is kind of similar. So what do they do? A put request is used to modify or update data that already exists on the server. Now, during the course of this course, I'm going to show you the difference between the put and the patch request. But let me just say it before we get to where we're practically going to see it. So let's say you have some data or a piece of data on your server that contains some information about a person. So for example, the name and the age. That's two information about a person. If you want to use a put request to update that piece of data on your server, you're going to need to specify both the name and the age and then update it. Don't worry if this sounds like jargons, don't worry, we're going to see it practically. So for you to use the put request, you're going to actually need to send a JSON data that contains the name and the age to make changes to the existing data. However, when you use a patch request, you can just specify which property you want to update. So for example, if I wanted to update only the name, if I'm using a patch request, I can just send only the information about what I want to update. So I can just say I want to change the name from Zeno to John. However, when I'm using a put request, even if I want to update only the name, I still have to send the data, the existing data about the age. Like I said, don't worry too much about all of this theoretical part. We're going to do practicals in the next one. The last request we're going to be working with a lot is the delete request, and simply it deletes data on a server. Now, all of these requests I've just talked about, they are equivalent to what is known as a CRUD operation or a CRUD operation, CRUD. And the C stands for create, R for read, U for update, and D for delete. It's something you're going to see commonly done in backend development. In fact, some people have said that backend development is like 80% CRUD, right? All right, let's continue. Now, I just want to quickly talk about the HTTP response status codes. But before I talk about it, let me show you an example from what we've done before. All right, so I've brought up the page we created before with our Express server, and this is the about page to be specific. Remember, we have a home page and an about page. So if I go to the home page, you see welcome to the home page, which is great. Now I'm going to right click and inspect this page. And then when I inspect the page, I want to go specifically to the network tab. So you see network here, I'll click that and it will just show me this piece of information here. I'm going to refresh this page one more time. So I've refreshed the page and the page is loading right now. Okay, the page is completely loaded. If you come to this point here, which shows the local host, which is where we are currently, and you expand it, so I'll just expand it, right? You see here that we have a status code. All right, so because the page is completely loaded, it gives us a status code among other things. It gives us the request method, which is the get request. It gives us the URL, which is localhost 5000, but what we're interested in is this status code. So here it gives us a status code of 304 and says that the code is okay. Let's try and go to the about page. So I'll say /about, hit enter, and voila. So you see, I'm now in localhost about, which is here, and if you look here, you see here that we also have a status code of 304, and under it here it now shows status of 200. So if you open this up here, you see more information about that request. Among other things, you see the status code. Same for when you click on this next place here, you will see here that we now have a status code of 200, and then it says okay in front of it. Now that's fine, that's okay. But there are other status codes that actually exist, because what if the request actually failed and we don't get the information, or we get an error? So now that's what I just want to briefly introduce to you quickly before we start building out projects. So I'll come back here, and I just said that status codes are issued by a server in response to a client's request made to that server from a browser. And very commonly, I'm sure you've seen a 404 page. This 404 is actually a status code that the resource you were looking for was not found on the server. All right, so now let me now show you just a quick diagram that shows some of those codes. So we have 200, so there's 200 up to 204, and then there's the 400 batch. So you see 400 stands for bad request, and we have the rest of them here. Then there's 500, so 500 stands for internal server error, and the rest of them as well. Then of course there is 300. So if I scroll down to the next place here, okay, oh, I think I missed, I didn't put 300 here, but we have 300 as well. Okay, we have some of them here. So there's 200, 201, 301 stands for this resource has been moved permanently, 303, 304, 307. So as we keep building projects, we're going to be using some of these status codes. And let me quickly say at this point that I do not expect you to memorize the status code. You shouldn't, right? As you keep building application, your sphere of understanding and use cases will keep increasing, and then you will find yourself using all of these status codes with time. All right, so that's about it for our HTTP request method and the HTTP response status code. So in the next one, we are now going to get our hands dirty and start building a simple full stack application. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.